Episode 13, The Silent Garage.
Sunday slid into Barton County like it was trying not to make a sound. The air was cool enough to nip at your arms, and a thin steam lifted off driveways where yesterday's heat still slept. Church bells from downtown floated in and out on the breeze. Somewhere, a coffee maker hissed, and somebody's screen door squeaked twice and thumped shut. Inside the half-open garage at Frank's place, time hadn't started yet. Frank was slumped in his lawn chair like a busted scarecrow, hat crooked low, boots planted wide. Empty cans ringed him like fence posts someone set in the dark. A half-drained whiskey bottle leaned against the cooler, its label puckered with sweat. The Bluetooth speaker in the corner showed a lonely dead blue light. It had given up on sad country sometime before dawn, but the last notes still clung to the walls. Tracy Lawrence, Keith Whitley. George Jones songs for the parts of a man you don't brag about. A box fan clicked twice, tried to catch, and quit. On the shelf, above the workbench, sat a framed photo dusty glass, a crack running through one corner. It was Frank on opening day of the Neon Moon Saloon. Fresh shirt, arms crossed, grin wide as county lines. The bar behind him glowed alive in the picture. The picture itself, not so much. He hadn't dusted it in a long time. Footsteps creaked on the back steps. Hudson came down slow in pajama pants and a hoodie, hair sticking up like a dandelion gone wrong. He stopped in the doorway to take in the battlefield. Cans, bottle, dead speaker, a projector on the bench with its back off like a patient mid-surgery. "Dad," he said, soft so the morning wouldn't break. Frank blinked into the light. "Morning, bud." His voice was gravel rolled in smoke. "You sleep out here." "Guess I did." He rubbed both hands over his face, then leaned forward and set the whiskey bottle upright like it deserved another chance at dignity. Hudson nodded toward the bench. "You working on it?" "Trying," Frank said simply. He picked up a screwdriver and backed out to screws with the slow, steady patience of someone who'd been sitting with himself a long time. Hudson dragged over a stool and settled beside him. No phone, no camera, no commentary. Just the quiet hum of a house waking up behind them, the fridge kicking on, a faucet running, a cupboard thunk, and the small music of metal on metal while Frank opened the machine like he was listening for a heartbeat. He didn't glance at the photo, he knew it was there. He also knew how much dust weighed. The morning slid across the concrete in a bright rectangle, and the garage stayed still enough to hear the tiny click every time Frank set a screw in a neat little row. By mid-morning, the outside world had climbed out of bed, dogs barked down the block. Someone tested a weed eater twice and gave up. Lawnmowers droned like far-off airplanes. The bells from St. Aloysius rang late, then rang again, like maybe they didn't trust the first try. Ricky came first, shirtless as a lifestyle choice, beer in hand like communion. He leaned a shoulder on the jam and squinted at the mess. "Brother, you look like Saturday ran you over," and then backed up to check for a pulse. Frank didn't look up. One corner of his mouth considered it. He reseated a harness plug. The quiet between them said, "I heard you. That's enough." Harry arrived behind Ricky in that Sunday shuffle hat low, mason jar in one hand, folded newspaper under the other like a prop. He took a long look. Bottles. Cooler. Bench. His boy bent over a broken thing. Then he eased into the orange chair with a sigh that might have been hello. "If a frog had wings," he said finally, "it wouldn't bump its ass." Ricky pinched the bridge of his nose. "Why is our family the only one that treats animals like guidance counselors?" Harry sipped because they listened. From inside, the metallic flick of a lighter, Diane stepped into the kitchen doorway in her robe, cigarette lit, purse still slung from last night like she hadn't decided if she was leaving or staying. She stood in the frame a full beat, eyes moving from the cans to the tools to the half-open projector. They passed over Frank and landed, for half a second, on the dusty framed photo above the bench. She took a long drag. "Some folks don't learn when to call it a night," she muttered, and drifted back into the house, trailing smoke and judgment. Ricky watched her go. "Well, that's one way to bless a man's Sunday." Frank's screwdriver clicked twice. No reply. Harry frowned after her, but didn't say a word. He reached for a chunk of scrap pine and started sanding a birdhouse edge. He'd already sanded more than enough. The shush-shush of paper on wood blended with the tiny tick of screws lining up like soldiers on Frank's rack. Ricky cracked another beer. "So we fixing a projector or performing surgery?" "Projector," Frank murmured. "Good, because I faint at the sight of screws." Hudson snorted. Harry smirked into his jar. Frank almost smiled. Almost. A neighbor wandered past and asked if the Chiefs game was at noon or 3. Ricky lied confidently about both. Somewhere, a radio on AM told a story from 1989 like it was breaking news. The day kept happening around them. And Frank kept turning small things in small circles until the shape of the problem started to make a kind of sense. By early afternoon, heat thickened the air enough to slow it down. Dust hung in the doorlight like a snow globe nobody wanted to shake. Larson sprawled in the shade with his face smashed against the threshold, snoring like a man who owed someone money. The projector on the bench was stripped to its bones. Frank cleaned the bulb socket with the corner of a t-shirt, blew canned air across the fan, brushed soot from the vents with the care of a man who's rebuilt worse than plastic. He worked like he was easing a knot from rope steady, patient, letting the fibers remember how they used to lie. Ricky fell asleep upright with a beer balanced on his belly and woke himself 3 times pretending he hadn't. Harry's amp radio drifted into a preacher talking about redemption through small things, hinges, seeds, second tries. Nobody said amen, but nobody turned it off. Hudson watched until the quiet started to ache. Dad, yeah, bud, never stopped moving. I heard what Mamaw said last night. Frank's hand froze on a wire. He stared at the board like it might answer for him. You weren't supposed to. I know, Hudson said. But I did. Frank's voice stayed low, dry. She said I never really accomplished anything. He found a screw with his thumb and rolled it once. Hard to argue with that. Hudson leaned in. She's wrong. Frank exhaled slow sen. I've had more half-starts than I can count. Jobs, plans, even that bar. Couldn't keep the lights on, couldn't keep up. His eyes flicked, once, toward the dusty opening day photo. Feels like every time I get something running, the belt snaps. Hudson shook his head. You kept it alive while it mattered. People still talk about it. And you built this place too. Everyone ends up here. You made something out of nothing. Twice. Frank didn't answer. He reseated the fan blades, spun them with a fingertip. They went around clean and true. Hudson kept going. Softer now. You raised me. You fixed things other folks give up on. You finish what matters. The Bucks fan hesitated and caught, as if it needed time to agree. From Harry's corner came the dry rasp of sandpaper, and, after a beat, his quiet verdict, some folks polish what never shines. Better to change the bulb. Ricky snorted awake. We talkin' frogs or feelings. Harry didn't look over. Nope. Frank's mouth moved a millimeter. Hand me that wire, bud. Hudson passed it. The rhythm returned. Click, twist, breathe, until the bench stopped, looking like a crime scene, and started looking like a thing that might live again. Evening rolled in slow, the kind of Barton County dusk that made everything look like a memory. The cicadas had clocked in, and somewhere down the street, a grill hissed over cheap charcoal. The air smelled like smoke, beer, and Sunday. The garage glowed warm under its single bulb. Harry's old chair creaked. Ricky's laughter echoed off the siding. And Hudson leaned near the workbench, watching Frank tighten the last screw on the projector. Moment of truth? Hudson asked. Frank nodded, quiet as ever. Hudson plugged it in and stepped back. For a second, nothing. Then a soft hum built into a steady whir. The fan caught, the lens blinked, and a pale beam spilled across the garage wall like the first light of morning. Holy hell, it's alive, Ricky shouted, nearly spilling his beer. Barton County Cinema is officially back in business. Harry raised his mason jar with a nod. Told you, frogs could fly. Hudson grinned, beaming like a kid again. You did it, Dad. Frank leaned forward, eyes locked on the light. The hum of the motor filled the space that words couldn't. He exhaled through his nose and gave the faintest nod. Guess I did. No one said anything else for a moment. Even Ricky stayed quiet, the way people do when something small turns sacred without warning. Frank stood up, brushing his hands on his jeans, and looked at the old framed photo of the Neon Moon Saloon on the shelf. He didn't stare long, just enough. Then he turned to the group. I may not be perfect, he said, voice calm but carrying weight, but I can accomplish things. He paused, looking at Hudson. And that one right there, that's the best thing I ever did. Hudson's grin faltered into something softer. You did all right, old man. Ricky sniffed loud enough for everyone to hear. Damn dust, he said, wiping his eyes. Harry didn't even look up. That's emotion, boy. You ain't allergic to feelings. Frank chuckled under his breath and reached for his phone. The Bluetooth speaker clicked awake after a long silence, crackling just enough before the first chords of I'm Gonna Be Somebody by Travis Tritt filled the garage. The song poured out like a confession set to guitar, steady, proud, unashamed. Ricky started drumming on his knees. Harry nodded along, and Hudson leaned against the doorway, just watching his dad. Not fixing, not joking, not running, just being. Diane stepped quietly into the doorway, cigarette glowing in the dark. She caught sight of the flickering wall. the men laughing low, the song swelling through the night. Frank tapped his boot to the beat, eyes half closed. The projector light danced across the garage wall, shining over old tools, half-built birdhouses, and the photo of the neon moon. Hudson picked up his phone, not to film, just to remember, and whispered into the mic. One repair, one song, one man proving he still could. This was life at Frank's place.